Hey guys,
Hi friends.
welcome to another Sunday Live video. This week we are coming to you guys from Bratislava, Slovakia. This is an area that we did not know a whole lot about when we started this trip, but it's actually been a really cool place, a cool town. It's kind of like a mid-sized city, or I guess really a smaller city in like international standards, but we really like it here. It's the capital of Slovakia. It's a cool place. We're here for a few more days. We actually did an 8-mile hike earlier today, which was pretty awesome, right on the Slovakia-Austrian border. So it's been an exciting time here. Tonight we're going to be talking about some mistakes that we see pretty commonly and that we also did starting out as travel therapists, like during your first contract, or really not just your first contract, but during any contract. Things to watch out for, things to avoid. One thing that makes this a little tough is, you know, our audience is almost all therapists, all PT, OT, SLP, and all settings. And so there's a wide variety. You could be a hospital-based SLP all the way to a outpatient sports medicine PT. So wide variety as far as clinical goes. So we're going to try to keep things like more broad and applicable to everyone. Things that that you should watch out for.
Yep. So last week we did our video on things to avoid or mistakes to avoid when you're looking for your first contract. And so as a segue from that, we wanted to talk about this week things to avoid during your first contract to set yourself up for success as a travel therapist on your first assignment. So I'm going to do some introductions while Jared gets the video shared in a few different groups so that more people can join on with us. So for anyone who may or may not know us already, my name is Whitney Aiken.
I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we are both traveling physical therapists. We've been traveling PTs for about 4 years now, and our site is called Travel Therapy Mentor, and then we also have a personal blog called Fifth Wheel PT. So we've been mentoring travel therapists for several years now, but especially over the past year with our site, Travel Therapy Mentor. So if you guys have joined in with us before, thank you for joining again. If you're new, we do videos every single week about travel therapy topics, just various ins and outs for you guys that are looking to get into travel therapy, as well as it can be some educational stuff for people that are already travel therapists but maybe still have a few things to learn as far as how all the travel therapy ins and outs work. So like I said, Jared is going to share this video in a few groups so that more people can join on with us. I'm hoping that we'll have some students and some new grads and even experienced clinicians join in with us tonight that will be taking their first travel therapy job. If you are joining in with us, I see that a few people are coming on live. If you would just say hi and let us know who you are and where you are in this process. Are you a current travel therapist? Are you a student? Are you someone who is a new grad and maybe is about to take your first travel job, or even an experienced clinician that's about to take your first travel job? If you would just leave us a comment and let us know you're watching and let us know who you are. So Jared, like I said, is getting this shared in a couple groups, so hopefully we'll have a few more people join on live. And I know a lot of you guys will watch this later too on the replay, so if you are watching on the replay, you can drop us a hashtag Team Replay in the comments. I see Heather is on. Hi Heather. She just passed the boards, the PT, NPTE national exam. So congratulations to Heather. I see that Emily is on with us. Hi Emily, and hi Judy.
Hey
so
guys.
Thank you guys for joining us tonight. And we hope to cover this important topic, like Jared mentioned, the top mistakes that we think that you should avoid during your first travel contract so that you can set yourself up for success.
This hotel room has a couch in it, which is pretty nice. We haven't had many hotel rooms with couches, so we've actually got a pretty good place to do this video this week.
So this is our office this week. We don't have, I think it was dragonflies behind us last week in Vienna. This week we're in Bratislava. So, that was the other part I forgot to mention in our introductions. If you guys are not familiar with our story, we are traveling around Europe right now for fun. We're not working in the traditional sense as PTs while we are in Europe. We're just traveling for about 4 months for fun, and the only work that we're doing is on our website. So, okay, so let's jump into the topic and talk a little bit about the mistakes that we think you should avoid during your first travel therapy contract. So these, like Jared mentioned, are kind of overarching principles, and they really apply to more things like productivity and efficiency and dealings with your coworkers and your boss and that sort of thing. We're not going to talk as much about clinical stuff because that's going to be very specific. If you're a new grad and you're wondering about clinical things, it's going to be very specific to you and your setting and your discipline.
Yep.
So that would be a harder topic to do this broadly. But this is more as a travel therapist, whether you're a new grad or we know a lot of experienced clinicians. Who was it, Catherine, that was just commenting saying she's getting ready to take her first travel job, and she's an experienced clinician, but this will be her first travel contract, and sometimes it's a little different.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely different.
So the first thing that we think, you want to talk about this one, Jared?
Yep. So productivity. This is something we talked about last week. So most time, when you interview with the facility, with the manager, they're going to tell you whatever the productivity expectation is. We talked about last week how we don't recommend that being in your contract. You don't want to have like some binding thing, especially at a skilled nursing or something where there's a lot of variability in the patients, like who you're seeing. You don't want it written in there that if you don't get 92%, then they might be able to take some of your pay away. So hopefully you don't have that in your contract. But let's say that you talk to the manager and they said, okay, when you get here, we expect 85%. Well, 85% is fairly reasonable. Maybe you were okay with that, you took the job. Well, let's say you get there and it's not at all what you expected. And it's a situation where that is very difficult to meet. You wouldn't know that kind of thing until you get there. The manager might have some kind of inclination based on prior therapists there or whatever, but you never know. A lot of therapists, permanent therapists, will work off the clock or work extra hours or fudge their billing a little bit to meet those standards. And then you get there as a traveler, you're not willing to do that, and you might not be able to meet those requirements. Whitney had a situation like this. When those productivity standards that you thought were going to be okay are not okay, you need to have a conversation with the manager there. Don't just try to suck it up. And I mean, okay, for the first week or maybe 2 weeks as you're getting settled in, you don't really know what is going to be okay or what's something that you're going to be able to meet. But once you get in a situation where you're pretty comfortable with the facility, you know where everything is, you are okay with the documentation system, you're going to know if you're anywhere near that productivity standard. And if you're not, you need to stand up for yourself in that situation and say, okay, here's what I'm doing. If you have any suggestions that I could improve, let me know. If not, I'm doing things to the best of my ability. This is as high as I'm going to be able to get to, and basically just lay that out there. Because if not, you get in a situation where they try to bully you into somehow getting to that standard. So they'll make these vague comments about, well, no one else has had a problem with this, or stuff like that. And basically what they're trying to do is either have you work off the clock or have you add extra minutes or things like that. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to get in that situation. So stand up for yourself in that scenario.
Yeah, and if any experienced clinicians are on here, I know Judy was on here. She's both an experienced clinician and now an experienced traveler as well. Chime in if you agree, if this has happened to you before where you've been bullied or talked down to about your productivity. And
this is pretty much going to happen. If you travel for any significant amount of time, it's going to happen that you're going to be in a situation, no matter what setting, where there's going to be some kind of productivity thing that other people have met. The reason they've met it is because they're doing something either not by the rules or they're working off the clock.
Yeah. So some more examples. I think SNF is a very common one, like Jared said, where they might expect 85 or 90%, and there's just a plethora of reasons, as all of us know that have been in any kind of clinical setting, as a PT and OT or speech therapist, just so many reasons in the inpatient setting why you would have trouble meeting productivity. Maybe the facility is not very organized. Maybe you're having to constantly wait on nursing or another staff member to get done with the patient. Maybe you're waiting on meal times. Maybe you're having to organize your day in terms of, I'm going to go see patient 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they're not always ready on your schedule as a therapist.
And even if all that stuff's perfect, maybe the documentation system doesn't allow you to document while you're with the person. And say, some of these documentation systems might take 30 to 45 minutes to type an eval. If you can't get any of that done during the eval itself, there's no way you're going to meet anywhere
Maybe
near.
all your patients are max assist, you're hands-on the whole time. I'm sorry, you can't document while you're with a max assist patient. Yeah. There's just so many factors, and you need to be willing to stand up for yourself with your manager and say, look, I'm doing the best I can, but these are the reasons A, B, and C that these productivity standards are not being met, or I'm not able to meet them, and maybe it's only some weeks. Maybe some weeks you can, some weeks you can't.
Yeah,
So
just be
inpatient-
forthcoming with the manager and let them know the reasons, what's going on. Ask if they have suggestions. That's a great way to bring it up without directly being confrontational. Is saying like, hey, you know, I've only been getting like 75%, and I've been really doing the best I can. I've been like minimizing my breaks, doing everything I possibly can to get as high as I can. Do you have any suggestions? And then you can kind of see by their answer, is it going to be constructive, or are they just like, well, I don't know, everyone else does it, and that kind of thing. You can judge
Yeah.
the facility based on
And
that.
then, so besides inpatient, another one I want to point out is outpatient, especially for PT, and I'm sure it's outpatient similar for OT and SLP as well. But for example, if they overlap patients, or if there's Medicare patients and they're expecting you to meet a certain number of units, but they want you to be unethical with your billing the way that you're supposed to bill under Medicare guidelines. So these are some things to consider when it's an outpatient facility, types of things that might hinder your productivity. But the biggest take-home point here is to not let them walk all over you and make you feel that you're somehow a bad therapist or you're inferior. You know, communicate with your manager. You don't want to get into a situation where you're just not communicating and you're saying, oh my gosh, this travel thing was such a bad idea. They threw me right into a full caseload and I can't handle it, and you're wanting to put in your 2 weeks notice, or maybe it's so bad that they're wanting to put in a 2 weeks notice on you. It's best to get ahead of that. It's best to be confident and make lists of, these are the reasons, this is what I'm doing from the moment I walk in the door to the moment I leave. I'm trying my best, I'm being efficient. Do you have constructive feedback as to how we can make this work?
Yep.
Because really, they've taken the time to hire you on, and you've taken the time to move there and everything. You don't want to give up on this in the first couple weeks. You want to try to make this work if possible, and hopefully it's not too much different than what was told to you in your phone interview.
Yep. Hey Jenna, thanks for joining. Real quick, it's a coincidence you joined because yesterday we're in Slovakia, and there's this girl in our tour group that was from the United States, like one of the only other people there from the United States. I started talking to her. She's planning to go to PT school, and she lives 10 minutes from UMass Lowell, and said that she wants to go there. And I was like, oh, I know a girl that went there. So
It's just a small
coincidence.
world. Okay, so Judy, Judy had some feedback for us. Judy says, as PRN, I have sometimes worked off the clock. Okay, working off the clock is the segue we're getting into from this productivity standard thing. I have sometimes worked off the clock to meet productivity. Other times I've been honest and I didn't meet it, and then I just documented where my time went. And as a traveler, I don't work off the clock. So that's really good to hear, Judy. We're the same way. And I have most certainly had to make a list of exactly, I had one really bad situation at a SNF where I had to make a list literally from what I did from 8 a.m. when I got there until 5 p.m. when I left, to show the regional manager, who wasn't even in the building, why my productivity was what it was. So I've been there. And then Judy says, now knowing what she knows, she would not do that as a PRN employee as well, and we agree with that.
Yep.
So the next segue from this is talking about working off the clock.
Yeah, exactly what Judy said. As a traveler, there's no reason to ever work off the clock. We are hourly employees. A lot of travelers, especially people that don't have any kind of community, right? People that are they just jump into traveling, which I'm sure was everyone back before like 7 or 8 years ago when the bloggers or anything was a thing.
Yeah.
You just jump in and you're just doing your best. I mean, that's what you did. So in that situation, if you're in a SNF where they're saying, okay, this needs to be your productivity, you don't want to bend the rules at all with billing, what are your options? You work off the clock and get it done. And a lot of travelers have done that in the past, especially travelers, because a lot of people feel bad about making more money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ridiculous, because we make more money because we have to move every 3 months. It's kind of a pain in the ass to do the job a little bit, depending on your personality. Like, some people are great with it, we enjoy it, but that's a hard thing for some people. It's not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We also have to duplicate expenses. Like, there's all these things that are the reason that we're compensated like we are.
Yeah.
So don't feel bad being a traveler making more money and like you should work off the clock because, oh, well, I'm getting paid a lot, I'm just gonna do it. Get paid for your time.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working there and like an outpatient clinic, and you have to stay another 20 minutes to do documentation, that's 20 minutes that you're on the clock. I've seen this weird thing in PT. I don't know if it's the same thing in SLP, OT, but some PTs and like the national PT groups will talk about documentation time is not productive time or whatever. Okay, it might not be productive time in terms of like billing, but that is directly related to the patient being billed. You have to document that in order for insurance to pay for the treatment. That is part of your job. There's no way that you should work off the clock documenting. That's part of your job. That's part of the time. All that should be counted.
Yep. And we can get on a huge soapbox about this. And I think it's a problem with healthcare in general, that they don't consider your documentation time as part of your job, but it's part of our job. I mean, I don't work for 8 hours seeing patients and then spend 2 hours at home at night doing paperwork because I couldn't get it done at work. No, any other normal job, you do your work while you're at work, and that's it.
Yeah, and we're not saying that you need to have time for documentation. Like, some clinics allow that. Most clinics don't. Mostly we're speaking from our experience with outpatient PT. You usually don't have documentation time. But a lot of them are set up in such a way that you can still get it done throughout the day. Either cancellations or while with patients or whatever, you can still get it done. That's great. That's wonderful. Almost all of our contracts have been that way.
Yeah.
But if there is a situation, say there are no cancellations, and you have a lot of tough patients that day, and you have extra evals, and you stay 30 minutes, then that's billable time. That's time that you need to write on your timesheet and you need to be paid for.
And maybe the documentation system is archaic, and it's not possible to get all of the documentation done point of service while you're with the patient. Or like I said earlier, in an inpatient setting, where you are one-on-one with these Medicare patients, and that's the only time you can bill for, but they're max assist, and you're evaluating them, and you're transferring them, and you're doing standing tasks with them, and all this stuff. You can't just sit there and type. So anyway, we can get on a huge soapbox about this, but the point is, this is something that's different about travel PT, because if you take a permanent salaried position, if you choose to take a salaried position, there is no 40 hours. If you choose to work under those conditions, it might be that the expectation is that you see patients for 40 hours and do documentation at home. And if you're coming from a perm therapist world, say you're an experienced clinician or you worked for a year or two perm before coming to travel, you're used to that already. Or say you had clinicals like that and you're used to that already, and then you get to the facility and everybody else at your travel facility is a perm employee and they're used to that and they're all doing that, then you feel kind of like a jerk being like, well, see, I only work 40 hours and I don't work off the clock, but you shouldn't, because you're an hourly employee and that's the contract that you've signed and the contract the facility has signed.
Yep.
So you should not feel bad about this and you should not work off the clock. With that said, I will say, if I feel like I'm the one who maybe was goofing off or being not as efficient, I'll do 15, 30 minutes here and there, finishing up at the end of the day, whatever it might be, or finishing up at lunch. Be reasonable with it. It's not like, oh my gosh, I worked 8 minutes off the clock, I'm gonna put it on my timesheet. But if it is a consistent half an hour every day, this is where this needs to be addressed, and you should not feel pressured to do this and work off the clock. And the last thing I'll say about this is, especially at outpatient, we've heard so many times from managers, well, you can take your laptop home to get your paperwork done, it's fine. And we're like, no, we're not going to take our laptop home because we're not getting paid while we're at home.
Yep.
Now, I know this might be a little bit different with home health. I don't know a lot about how that schedule is set up, but I do know that a lot of therapists choose to do their paperwork at home as home health therapists, so maybe a different situation there. So this leads directly into, we talked about productivity and not getting walked on as far as what's reasonable for productivity standards. We talked about not working off the clock. Now the thing that comes after that is, what happens if you are ending up working a lot of overtime?
Yeah, so by the way, if you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to ask them. This video hopefully will be a little shorter than our normal ones.
We always say that.
Yeah, we always say that. They always end up being an hour somehow, so hopefully we'll keep them a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
But if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, and also if you're getting any value out of this, if you're learning anything, if you would just like the video or give us a thumbs up, tag your friends, something like that, just to let us know you're there and you're listening.
So a common question we get when I've written articles in the past, or we've had past videos where we mention not working off the clock, is how do you bring up that scenario with the manager or something like that when you're working more hours than are more than 40 hours basically, and you're going to get overtime. So what I've always chosen to do, and what I usually recommend, is to just work the hours that you need to get the job done, write that on your timesheet, and then you turn that in at the end of the week, right? And then the manager will see that there's overtime on there, and either they will just sign it and then you get paid the overtime, or they say, hey, there's overtime on here, and then they'll start a conversation with you about it. I think that's the easiest way to go about it. And then you say, oh, well, those are the hours I worked, these things happened, and then you'll have a conversation, and either they'll try to make it more accommodating for you so that you don't have to work more than 40 hours, or they'll agree to pay you the overtime. And it's happened both ways for me. I've had situations where they're completely fine with overtime. No one ever says anything to me about it. I work the whole contract to get paid a pretty significant amount of overtime, and everything's good. I've had other situations where they say something about it, and I'm like, there's going to be some days where there's cancellations and I leave early. There's going to be other days where I have 5 evals and I'm going to have to stay late. If you can make the schedule a little more consistent, if possible, then that would help things. And then sometimes they do that. So that's the best way, I think, to start that conversation. As far as overtime, though, if you do work a contract where you're going to be working overtime, or you might know that up front. So sometimes on the phone interview, ask that question: is there a possibility of overtime? If there is, you want to make sure in your contract that you're getting paid more than just time and a half of your hourly pay for overtime. If you didn't do that, so we've had situations in the past where we didn't do that.
Yeah, because it's not very clear a lot. I mean, most of the time they're not going to say that you're going to work overtime. Most of the time it doesn't come up, and especially if this is your first contract, your first experience as a travel therapist, you've asked 100 other questions on the interview. You didn't want to breach the subject of overtime, and we get that. And so we normally don't either. But if you get to a contract like Jared has in the past, where you find out maybe it's a rural area and they don't have any PRN help, and so if they need weekend evals done, maybe the manager might ask you to stay a little late on Friday to do them and doesn't care about paying you overtime, or might ask you to come in on the weekend even though you worked 5 days. And if you're willing to do that, and you find after a few weeks that you are getting overtime, but on your original contract it's only time and a half on your hourly, which that's a whole nother conversation. If you don't know what we're talking about, that's too low, because your hourly as a travel therapist is lower than a normal salary. So we can get into that at a different time, but basically it needs to be higher than that. If later during your contract you find this out, you need to go back and have a conversation with your recruiter about the pay.
Yep. And so most recruiters will tell you, if you bring this up, not most, but a lot of recruiters will tell you, like, it's not a big deal. No travelers ever work overtime, whatever. And sometimes that's true. And I've talked to a lot of travelers that never work overtime. But sometimes it's not true. And I worked a contract where in 4 months I worked 200 hours of overtime. I had 1 week that I worked like 62 hours as a traveler. So it does happen. And in that situation, you don't want to be just making time and a half, which might be $30 an hour for overtime. We would recommend at least $45 an hour for overtime. So you want to you negotiate that in your contract with the recruiter beforehand. If not, talk to them, when you figure out, okay, I'm going to be working a lot of hours, talk to them and get that increased. If it's just $30 an hour, that's not really worth your time as a therapist. Overtime is a hassle. It takes away from your free time. You're in these travel locations, you probably want to explore and do things, and you don't want to be tired all the time. So you need to be compensated well for that time. So most companies, most recruiters, I would say, if you bring up that conversation and say, like, I didn't realize I was going to be working so much overtime, this $30 an hour or this time and a half of my hourly rate is not really worth it to me. Is there any way that we can increase it to $45 or $50 an hour? I think most will do that because they want to keep you, they understand. Sometimes they're making like $90 an hour off of overtime pay, and you're making 30. That's not fair.
Yeah, the travel company.
The travel company. Sometimes they're just making the bill rate, but even so, that's probably $55 to $65 an hour, and you're getting paid 30. That's not fair.
So they're basically getting to keep, the travel company is getting to keep the extra. So what would hopefully happen in this situation is that they would be able to write an addendum to your previous contract. So just write an addendum that says, now these are the changes to this clause on the contract. What happened in a different situation for Jared is he brought this up with one of his recruiters, and the way their legal department, or whatever the jargon was on the contract, they couldn't do an addendum like that, but they agreed to pay a bonus in the form of that extra compensation, and it was like an additional $15 an hour for every overtime hour worked paid at the end of the contract. So that was how we were able to negotiate it mid-contract, once Jared realized that it was a facility where he was working a lot of overtime.
Yep.
So the big mistake here is don't work overtime if you're not getting compensated for it. So whether that means working off the clock and not putting those hours down, definitely not, or working overtime at a subpar rate. So if you find out that you're going to be working a lot of overtime after a couple weeks, either get that rate increased, or if they won't agree to increase that rate, don't agree to work the overtime. It's a waste of your time.
Yeah, and it's always optional. They can't force you to work overtime. So if it's only going to be $30 an hour, I would just pass it up. And I can tell you, I made this mistake as a new grad. My very first contract, I stayed there for 9 months. I worked over 200 hours of overtime in that first 9 months. This is a different contract than the other one I was talking about. I worked 200 hours in 4 months. But I was only getting paid $30 an hour for all of that. And I didn't know any better. And I was a new grad, and I was really excited about making any money. So I was ecstatic to work for $30 an hour. I was fine with that. I'd just been making nothing for the last 8 years. So I was really excited about it, and I was fine with it. But now knowing what I know, I could have easily been getting paid probably $50 an hour for all those hours. And that's an extra $4,000 over that 9 months. That's a lot of money that I left on the table there.
Yeah.
So learn from my mistake and don't do that.
The other thing is, like, in that situation, some therapists might be like, well, any money's money. I'd rather still get extra hours and make more money. But realistically, if you wanted to make more money outside of your 40-hour contract, you could go get a PRN job somewhere else. Maybe Jared has done that. Jared got a PRN job at one of his jobs, making the 45 or 50 an hour and not make $30 an hour working at your existing contract overtime. So that's our big mistake we want you to avoid. Those were kind of like a trio of things that all went together: the productivity, the working off the clock, and the overtime.
Yep.
If there's questions about that, do you guys have any questions? If you do, leave them in the comments.
Hey Nico, thanks for joining.
So we want to segue from that to talk about a couple different areas. Well, the next one kind of relates in some ways. So the next one we want to talk about is avoiding workplace drama. So this is for multiple different reasons.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite things about being a traveler, to be honest. We go in all these facilities and we see all the permanent staff when changes happen and everyone's in an uproar. I'm sure anyone that has actually worked as a permanent therapist here knows this situation where you have a meeting, either it's a planned meeting or a surprise meeting, and then the meeting happens and there's like all these changes that take place or coming changes and everyone freaks out, right? That happens so often at our contracts, and that's a shitty part of being a permanent PT in my opinion, or a permanent therapist in general. We don't enjoy that, and that's a really cool part about being a traveler, because when you get in these clinics and something like that happens, you're in the moment. It's hard to look at the big picture when you're on an assignment, and we completely fall into this every single time, even though we've been traveling for a long time now. You get there and it's like that's your whole world for that 3 months, and you can't imagine not being there. I think that's a normal
yeah,
part
I honestly always just feel like a regular employee when I'm there. I mean, we're there for 3 months. Like, that's a long time to get to know your coworkers and feel like you're part of the crew. But yeah, so sorry, didn't mean to say better.
Jenna, you don't know anything about workplace trauma, do you?
No, I've never been someone that has workplace trauma.
Yeah. So that's the awesome part about being a traveler, because you'll have that same visceral reaction that all the other therapists have in that situation, and it's kind of a contagious feeling. Everyone's upset and everyone's like gossiping to each other, and it's a terrible situation, and you can get sucked into that. But what you have to remind yourself as a therapist, as a travel therapist, and we do this every single contract, because undoubtedly there's going to be some sort of drama, some situation that everyone's not happy with, or some changes, billing changes, schedule changes, all kinds of changes. Just remind yourself that this is a temporary part of your year. You're usually only going to be there 3 months. If it's a terrible assignment, you're going to be there 3 months. It's not a big deal. Like, don't get sucked into that. And we have done that over and over. Get sucked into that workplace drama. You feel bad for everyone else. You commiserate with them. They come to you and they're like, oh, I can't believe all this. And you get sucked into that. Try to avoid that. You don't need to be involved in that at all. You're a temporary employee there. Just go in, do your job, and try to avoid all of that. And it will make your life so much easier, and you'll be very thankful to be a traveler.
So not only is it good just for your own mental health and not getting sucked into drama, usually you want to try to stay away from that, right? But it's also a mistake to get sucked into that for your efficiency. because you are new there. You might be new to the documentation system. It's a brand new caseload. You've already got a lot on your plate as far as being efficient and, like we talked about earlier, trying to meet productivity so that nobody's mad at you and you're not trying to put in your notice and they're not trying to fire you. You need to do a good job and be efficient. The more you get sucked into drama and sucked into coworker conversations, the slower you're going to be, the less you're going to get your paperwork done. Your productivity is going to go down. You're going to end up working off the clock more or feeling obligated to work off the clock more and having a lot more of these issues. So it is really easy to get sucked in. And of course, you want to bond with your coworkers and you want to chat with them. You know, you don't want to just have to be a machine the whole time you're at work, typing and not talking to anyone. Of course, you want to make friends, you want to have fun. But, you know, try to displace yourself from the drama and cut conversations short, you know, distance yourself physically. Sometimes, I mean, I've worked in some really small clinics where it is hard to get away physically from someone so you don't chat, whether it's about drama or whether it's just about getting to know the person. But you do have to try to be efficient. And like I said earlier, if there are times here and there that you're not being efficient because you are chatting with your coworkers, then that's on you and you need to own up to that. But I can't tell you how many times that Jared has texted me after work, where are you? Why aren't you home? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm trying to get my paperwork done because I was talking to so-and-so for an hour after work.
So Whitney gets sucked into that a lot more than I do, but I try to be as efficient as I can to try to get out of there. Not to say that I don't get involved in some of the drama sometimes, and I have to remind myself that that is a bad idea pretty consistently. But what you'll find is that there's certain people at assignments that just want to complain about things. I think these people are pretty much any clinic you go to, you're going to find someone like this that wants to complain. If you don't engage with them and you don't, I guess, like humor them in their complaints like that, a lot of times they'll leave you alone with it, and that's a lot better for you. It's better for your mental health. It's better for your performance at the job. It's probably better for your patients because then you don't go into treatments with like extra emotional baggage basically. But just try to avoid that workplace drama. That is a big thing, and it's something that you have to learn as you go, kind of, because you have to remind yourself consistently, pretty much.
Yeah, so that is something to avoid, especially on your first contract, but hopefully carrying with you forward on your other contracts as well.
Yes.
Okay.
So those are like the big things, I think, as far as clinical goes, as far as being on assignment.
Well, not clinical as far as like
well, yeah, not
clinical skills,
but being
but
in
just
the clinic.
Efficiency and, you know, workflow and that sort of thing. Like, basically, there's a lot of strategy, I think, that goes into being a travel therapist that is different from being a permanent therapist. I mean, there's 100 clinical things out there, you know, how to treat the patient, how to talk to the patient, how to keep your subjective interviews short during your eval, and all these types of things, and the best manual skills to use and all that mumbo jumbo. But this is talking about just like strategies so that you won't sink or swim as a travel therapist, because there are certain challenges that we face as travel therapists, and you do have to be more efficient. And all those things we talked about before are kind of about efficiency and being a good employee and business person. I mean, of course, still be a good therapist and treat your patients good and all that good stuff and do everything you learned. But this is talking about business stuff so that you have a successful contract and you are viewed as a good traveler and you get positive reviews and have a, don't get your contract canceled and, you know, that sort of thing.
Yep.
So
here's another thing that a little bit unrelated, not exactly during your contract, but it's something that we see some travelers make mistakes with this, and it can end up being a costly mistake. That is not knowing when to start looking to either extend your contract or start looking for the next contract. We've met some other travelers where they're very passive while they're traveling. They don't do a lot of active job searching. So Whitney and I don't know why we're like this. I don't know if this is because we're a pair or what, but we are very active as far as, okay, we're going to be looking at job lists, trying to find 2 jobs close together. We're going to be talking to multiple recruiters, trying to get everything lined up. There's some travelers that don't travel like that at all. So they'll just work with one recruiter, and they'll basically just go wherever that recruiter says that there's a job, and they just go to it.
yeah,
They're very passive.
I think everybody has a different strategy and a different goal.
Yeah.
But I do think that we are very much planners, and I think the other thing was in our careers, or in the beginning of our careers especially, that you had a certain financial goal in mind,
Yeah.
and you wanted to have continuous employment. And to be honest, in order to have continuous employment and not have unwanted time off where you're not getting paid, you need to plan ahead. And that means, like Jared said, start scoping out the jobs well in advance, at least 6 weeks, if not 2 months before.
Yeah. So we ran into a situation with a traveler that we met at one of our contracts who, it was probably like 2 weeks before his assignment ended. And Whitney was like, "Oh, are you extending your contract, or where are you going next?" And he was like, "I don't know." And she was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Well, my recruiter hadn't really contacted me, and I don't really know." And we were like, "What? What do you mean? You haven't talked to anybody or thought about it or anything?" So we would recommend probably around the midway point of your contract, which is 6.5 weeks, which would mean that you have 6.5 weeks left, maybe even a little bit earlier than that.
Yeah, 6 to 8 weeks.
You'll have a pretty good feeling after a month at a contract. So a month to 6 weeks, you'll know, is this somewhere that I would maybe want to stay longer? Either is the clinic good, is the location good, are both things good? You'll know, is this somewhere you might want to stay? And that's when you need to start the conversation with the manager of the clinic and say like, "Hey, have you hired anybody permanently? Do you think that you're going to need me longer than the end of this contract?" So start that conversation. If it's somewhere you want to stay, usually, unless they found someone permanent, then they're going to want you to stay. And then that's great. That's wonderful. Then you have another 3 months to not worry about it.
Yeah, and usually the way that I introduce this conversation, and I say I because I'm usually the one who introduces this
Yes.
conversation for
That's
both
true.
of us. I usually say something like, "Hey, this is about the halfway point of my contract. This is normally when I start going ahead and looking for my next contract. So I just wanted to find out what were your clinic needs, or your staffing needs is something I often say. What are your staffing needs? Do you think that you'll maybe need me longer? Do you think you no longer need a traveler?" And it's usually a good sign if they've a good sign for you if they've had travelers before and it's been a little while since they've had somebody perm, and usually whether they've already interviewed somebody because the other staff members might be talking about it, or you might see them come into the clinic like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's the new PT they just interviewed," and "Oh, that new PT starting in 2 weeks." So then it's like, "Oh gosh, okay, well I guess I'm out of here."
Yep.
So you have a pretty good idea, but that's honestly, in our opinion, that's on you. Now, this other traveler we were talking about that was kind of like, "Well, my recruiter hasn't really contacted me." I mean, it is nice if your recruiter is proactive, and a lot of them keep what I've heard them call like hot sheets, where they have like a spreadsheet of their travelers, and it's like, okay, well, this one's on contract till September, so I'll check in with them a few weeks before their end date and find out what the next move is. And it is helpful if they are proactive like that, but you need to be proactive for yourself because it's not the recruiter that loses out on money. Really, I mean,
They lose a little bit,
a
but
little
not
bit,
nearly
but
as
you know
much
what I
as we
mean.
lose.
It's not them not getting a paycheck every week. If you don't secure a job for yourself in advance, you're not getting paid. That's just how it works as a contract therapist. So you need to be proactive and start thinking, am I going to extend here? Am I going to be going somewhere else?
Yeah, and if you're not going to extend, basically, well, it depends. If this is your first contract, then you're probably only licensed in the one state that you're in. And then that's when you need to start thinking, okay, if they've already hired someone permanently, or you have the conversation about extending, and it's not needed, or you don't want to extend, say the contract, you don't really like it. That's when you need to start thinking, okay, how many jobs are in this state? How many are open right now? Is there a good likelihood that I'll find another job that starts when I want it to start? Or do I want to go to a different state? And if you want to go to a different state, you need to start that licensing process pretty early. Probably most states, I would say, start it probably 4 to 6 weeks before you're going to go where you're planning to start there. At least. Some states are longer than that, but most states, 4 to 6 weeks would probably be a good time to start the license, so that then you're licensed and ready to start interviewing for jobs, at the very minimum, a couple weeks before you end your contract. Try to get that stuff lined up as quickly as you can. Most of the time, travel jobs are ASAP starts, so it'll be like, when you look at a travel job list, it's almost always as soon as possible, as soon as possible, as soon as possible. Occasionally, they'll know that they're going to have someone leaving, or they're going to have someone going on maternity leave or something like that in 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. And those are perfect jobs to get secured early on. That's the perfect situation. If you find, say, 4 weeks into your contract, you have 8 weeks or 9 weeks left, and you find that this job in California or something that you're already licensed in, they need a start date on the same date that you want to start. Go ahead and get that job secured. That's perfect. That's the ideal situation. But a lot of times that doesn't happen, and you'll end up in the last like 4 weeks, you start getting a little bit frantic, but that's a normal part of traveling. Everything's last minute. So that's when most jobs are secured, is in that last 4 weeks, sometimes even like 2 weeks, sometimes 1 week. We've had situations where a week before is when we sign the contract and figure out where we're going, and then we have 1 week to get there. So, but the earlier the better. So start that early, be proactive, get licensed beforehand. Don't wait until you find a job to get licensed there. That is a huge mistake that so many travelers make.
Yeah. In our opinion, this has been our experience, in our opinion, that you should get licensed before you apply for a job. There are therapists that do it the other way. They get a job and then they wait to get licensed, but you are risking a lot there.
I think the therapists that do that don't realize how much risk they're taking, because, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not huge risk, right? You might miss out on $3,000 or $4,500. That's kind of a lot of money. That's a lot of money, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not like a risk.
But it is, because it all depends on what you're traveling for.
Yeah.
But if you're traveling to make more money and you're wasting time between contracts because you didn't plan ahead or you didn't have the license, then you're honestly negating the extra money that you make. If you lose out on 2 to 3 weeks of work between jobs, you're negating the extra money that you're making being a travel therapist versus being a perm therapist. But not everybody's in it for the money.
Well, I can tell you though,
but
I can say we've gotten questions, a lot of questions. So probably, I would say, probably 10 in the last year and a half since on this website and the other website I have. People reaching out with questions like, okay, I'm supposed to start at this clinic in 1 week, but my license hasn't gone through. And I talked to the board and they said it's probably not going to go through for 3 weeks. What do I do? There's nothing you can do in that situation. You're at their mercy. When the license goes through is when it goes through. And a lot of times that clinic that you're already signed the contract with, they're not going to want to wait 2 more weeks for you to start. So they'll just cancel your contract and find someone else. And when that happens, not only are you out that 2 weeks of work, but you might be out more work trying to find another contract. So don't do it that way.
And it's not even that they might be mad and they might cancel your contract. They might not accept you in the first place. Certain jobs won't even interview or won't even offer you a position if you're not already licensed.
Because they've had these situations where a traveler is supposed to be there, the license doesn't go through, and then they're like out in the cold for 1 or 2 weeks, either waiting on that traveler or trying to get a new one last minute. So then they don't want to go through that anymore. So instead they just say you have to be licensed and ready to go when you apply. And I don't blame them for that. I would do the same thing if I was a facility.
So I think this is the reason that we have always been so proactive, because we just understood the consequences if we were not, especially in choosing to get licensed in a state that doesn't have a lot of jobs, because when you need to find 2 jobs together, you need to pick a state to get licensed in that's going to have a probability of a high number of jobs. So a classic example here is like Utah or Colorado they don't tend to have a lot of jobs, especially Utah.
Well, Colorado does. Utah doesn't have a lot.
Well, I guess not close to Denver, but especially Utah. So Utah hardly ever has any PT jobs. So if you just really want to go to Utah, it's like, yeah, but it's not a good bet for you to get licensed there, because it's very unlikely there's going to be a job there. You need to think ahead and ask your recruiter which states tend to have a lot of jobs, or see if you can look at their historical job lists and think ahead, like, I want to go to, the Southwest, but I don't necessarily care what state. So is Arizona or New Mexico or California better, or Nevada? Like, which one should I pick? So you got to look at it that way. And these are some important things to think about, especially on your first contract, because maybe you only have the 1 license or 2 licenses on your first contract. So this is when you have to really, for the first time, begin your strategizing for the next contract, timing for licensing, timing for job interviews, and planning your next move.
Yep, and it's going to be different for every single traveler, but try to come up with your own strategy that's going to work well for you, about how many states you want to get licensed in, when you want to do the licensing, all that, but be proactive with it. So that's pretty much the big things that we came up with as far as things to avoid during the contract. And basically the takeaways here are, don't be taken advantage of. Don't let the managers or recruiters or anybody walk on you just because you're a traveler that's supposed to be making a lot of money, and you're not supposed to have any complaints.
Yeah.
And the other thing is be proactive. Those are the two big things as a traveler.
Yep.
Stand up for yourself and be proactive.
Yep.
And if you can do those things, you're probably going to be a successful traveler.
Yep. If anybody's watching and you have questions about what we talked about, or anybody, I know a few of you that were on here, like Jenna and Judy, are experienced clinicians or experienced travelers. Do you guys have any suggestions for new travelers or people that you've seen in your first contract or two? We'd love to hear your suggestions, and we'd love to hear any new travelers or new therapists' questions as well.
Yep. And if you could like this video, that would be awesome.
Yes, we would appreciate it.
And the people that watch these videos for an hour, I love you guys, because I have never watched a Facebook video that is longer than like 5 minutes. I don't know.
That's not true.
No, seriously, I don't watch Facebook video. I can listen to a podcast for 4 hours because I can do
We've
other things.
watched a whole Facebook video. I don't think we watch a lot of them live.
I almost never do.
I usually go back and watch them later, and then maybe skip over the parts I don't want to watch.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
So I'm usually team
So
replay.
people are probably skipping over ours too, but
So yeah, we appreciate you guys very
Yeah.
much. And if you got any value out of this information, we would love if you could just give us a thumbs up.
and people
drop
watching
an
this
emoji,
afterwards.
all that good stuff we like to say.
We've seen in this last couple weeks, especially filming these videos at like, I guess it's 5 p.m. Eastern time and like 2 p.m. Western time is like a terrible time to do
Western
this.
time is not a time.
Well, what is it? Pacific time? Yeah. So it's a terrible time to. I've never been to the West Coast, so Western time,
It's
something like that.
Pacific time.
It's a terrible time to do these videos, but we're 6 hours ahead, so it's almost midnight here.
I think it's literally 12 hours ahead of Hawaii. So I think it's literally 5 a.m. in
So
Hawaii.
we don't really have a choice to film it at this time. But so anyway, the point of that is, I know we record these and we only have like a couple hundred views, but then I'll go back and look and there's like 1,000 views a few days later. So a lot of people watch these later. So if you have any questions later, all these people watching on
Yeah.
the replay, ask the questions and we'll come back and answer them.
Thank you for all the team replays. So just a quick recap of the things that we talked about. So we talked about on your very first contract, mistakes to avoid. Don't get taken advantage of in terms of productivity. Don't work off the clock. Don't get taken advantage of when it comes to overtime. If you are going to work overtime, make sure that you are compensated fairly for this overtime. Avoid the workplace drama for your own sanity, mental health, and your own time efficiency so you can be an efficient employee and get the heck out of there and go have fun somewhere. If you want to talk to your coworkers, go out for a beer after work. Don't be sitting around wasting time and ruining your productivity while you're on the clock. And then the last thing is be proactive when it comes to looking for your next contract, and whether that's getting a license in a new state or extending your current contract or looking for your next contract. So those are our top 5 take-home points for your very first travel contract.
Hey Erica, thanks for joining. Better late than never, I guess, but we're just about done, so.
So thank you guys so much again for joining, and you can find us back here again next week, probably on Sunday. Not
Probably.
sure.
We are going to be in Croatia. I'm actually really excited about Croatia, not only for the Game of Thrones stuff, but I've heard a lot of good things about Croatia. And recently we've had a lot of people on our tours that are from Croatia, so so it seems like it's going to be a cool place. And we're going to be there for 12 days, so we'll probably make a couple videos there.
Yeah, so we're super excited. It's going to depend on how our Wi-Fi is. We've been staying in hotels in the past couple cities, and Wi-Fi has been perfect, but in Croatia, it's 100% Airbnb. So we will be at the mercy of the Croatian Wi-Fi Airbnb situation, so we'll let you know.
Yep.
But thank you again, guys, so much for joining. Thanks, Erica. We appreciate it. And Erica, you did a really great job on your very first Facebook Live last week. We did watch that one.
Yep.
So we appreciate you guys. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Good luck to those of you guys that are just jumping into this travel therapy game, especially you new grads. If you guys have questions, if you need recommendations for recruiters and which companies and all that good stuff, feel free to send us a message on Facebook, Travel Therapy Mentor, or you can send us a recruiter request on our website. If you go to traveltherapymentor.com, we have a page, a button on there you can click that requests our recommendations for recruiters. So if you have questions, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep. See you guys later.
All right, bye guys. Good night.
Bye.